Haiti. It's a nation grappling with a really serious crisis right now. And honestly, it's tough to even know where to begin.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. It's more than just, the headlines about gangs.
Right. You hear gangs, and you might picture like turf wars in a few neighborhoods. But we're talking about a situation where gangs control vast swaths of the country.
Hmm.
It's estimated that they have influence over as much as 90% of the capital, Port-au-Prince.
It's essentially a chokehold. And it's not just about territory either. It's about power. Power that these gangs have accumulated, often through brutal violence.
And this violence, it's rooted in a whole tangle of issues. Poverty, political instability, corruption. You can't untangle one without addressing the others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to truly grasp the depth of this crisis, we need to rewind a bit. It's important to understand the historical context here, like the Petrocaribe scandal, for example. That really set the stage for a lot of the unrest we're seeing today.
Okay, the Petrocaribe scandal. I've heard the name, but I'll be honest, the details are a bit fuzzy for me. Could you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. In short, Petrocaribe was this oil alliance between Venezuela and several Caribbean countries, including Haiti. It started back in 2005. Basically, Venezuela offered these countries loans to buy oil on super favorable terms.
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal, especially for a country like Haiti struggling to get back on its feet.
On paper, it seemed like a good idea. The money from these loans, it was supposed to go towards development projects, right? Building infrastructure, schools, hospitals, that kind of thing. It had the potential to make a real difference in people's lives.
So where did it all go wrong?
Well, the money, it basically vanished. I mean, we're talking millions, even billions of dollars just gone. An investigation by the Haitian Senate in 2017 revealed widespread corruption. Government officials were pocketing these funds, using them for personal gain instead of helping the people they were supposed to serve.
So it wasn't mismanagement, it was straight up theft.
Pretty much. And this is Haiti. We're talking about a country already devastated by the 2010 earthquake, plagued by poverty, and with this long history of political instability. People were already fed up. So when this Petrocaribe scandal came to light,
It was like adding fuel to the fire that was already burning.
exactly. And that's where the whole "where did the Petrocaribe money" chant comes from. It became this rallying cry for the protest movement that began in 2018. People were demanding accountability, tired of the corruption that was holding their nation hostage.
It's a reminder that corruption doesn't just happen in some abstract sense. It has real-world consequences. In this case, it eroded public trust, fueled instability, and created an environment where something like this current gang crisis could take root.
You hit the nail on the head. It's all interconnected. But there's another layer to this as well. To fully understand the role of gangs in Haiti, we have to go even further back and look at the country's complicated, even dark history with armed groups. We're talking about a legacy of violence that has haunted Haiti for decades.
I've heard whispers of this, like the Tonton Macoute under the Duvalier dictatorship, a chilling chapter in Haiti's past.
The Tonton Macoute, yeah. They were essentially the Duvalier's personal death squad, this brutal paramilitary force that operated with complete impunity. They were responsible for countless human rights abuses, torture, disappearances, assassinations. Their whole purpose was to instill terror, to silence any opposition to the regime.
It's hard to even imagine living under that kind of constant fear and oppression. But the Duvaliers were ousted decades ago. Doesn't that mark a turning point for Haiti?
You'd hope so, but the legacy of that era, it cast a long shadow. The culture of violence, of using armed groups for political gain, it didn't disappear overnight. And in many ways, it paved the way for the rise of gangs as we see them today.
So even after the Duvaliers, there was still this power vacuum, this culture of violence that never really went away.
Right. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, the 2010 earthquake hit.
A tragedy of unimaginable proportions.
It was devastating, not just in terms of the immediate loss of life and the physical destruction, but also in the way it further weakened an already fragile state. The government was in complete disarray, unable to provide even the most basic services.
And in that chaos, the games saw an opportunity.
Exactly. They stepped in to fill the void, providing a perverse form of order and control in the absence of a functioning government. And it's a pattern we've seen repeated time and again throughout Haiti's history. Instability breeds violence, and violence begets more violence.
It's a vicious cycle, and it's the Haitian people who are caught in the middle. But before we dive deeper into the current gang war, I think it's important to understand the key players, the groups vying for power in this chaotic landscape.
Mhm.
So who are the major players in this gang war? I know we've mentioned G9 and GPEP a few times.
Right, those are the two biggest hitters in this whole mess. It's like a twisted Shakespearean drama.
Okay, so let's start with G9. What's their deal?
Well, they call themselves the Revolutionary Forces of the G9 family and allies, which tells you a bit about their style. They burst onto the scene around 2020, headed up by this guy, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier.
Barbecue. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up.
Oh, the nicknames in Haiti's underworld are their own story, but Cherizier, he's not some small-time crook. He's a former police officer, and his gang, G9, they're known for extreme violence, like next-level brutality.
Former cop heading a gang, that's unsettling, to say the least.
Yeah, it really highlights the blurred lines we're dealing with here, and it gets even murkier. Early on, there were rumors that G9 was connected to the government, like maybe even receiving support during President Moise's time.
Wow, so a government-backed gang?
It's never been definitively proven, but the whispers were there. However, things changed after Moise's assassination in 2021. Cherizier, he became a vocal critic of the government, even went so far as to blockade the country's main oil terminal at one point.
He's playing hardball, that's for sure. Using force to try to gain leverage?
Exactly. G9, they even started calling themselves a revolutionary organization, fighting against corruption, or so they say. Of course, their methods are another story entirely. A whole lot of violence.
Right, it makes you question the whole fighting for the people narrative when they're resorting to such brutality. What about this other group, GPEP? How do they fit into all this?
Well, they emerged as rivals to G9. There's a thought they might have backing from opposition parties, maybe even wealthy business figures who were against Moise. They're mainly based in Cité Soleil, which has always been a tough, impoverished area, ripe for gang activity.
So it's almost like a proxy war, with G9 on one side and GPEP on the other, both vying for control.
You could say that, but it's vital to remember both sides are ruthless. We're talking about massacres, kidnappings, extortion. People's lives mean nothing to them.
It's a horrifying situation for the people caught in the crossfire. And to make matters worse, it's not just these two major gangs, right? There are others caught up in this conflict.
Absolutely. You've got groups like 400 Mawozo, who you might remember from when they kidnapped those American missionaries back in 2021.
Right, that was all over the news.
400 Mawozo, they control a lot of territory outside the capital, involved in all kinds of criminal activities, smuggling, extortion, even arms trafficking. They're a nasty piece of work.
So a powerful and dangerous group then?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And then there are others like the 5 Seconds Gang, known for using sexual violence as a weapon. And then there's Delma 6, which is basically Cherizier's old crew from his police days. It's a tangled web with alliances constantly shifting and everyone out for themselves.
It's like the entire country is being held hostage by these gangs.
And Moise's assassination, it just made everything worse, created this huge power vacuum that these gangs were all too eager to fill.
So we've got this power vacuum, escalating gang violence, a population terrorized and desperate for some kind of relief. What happens next?
Well, things had already reached a boiling point, and then in late 2022, we saw this horrifying new development, the rise of the Bois Kale movement.
Bois Kale. I'll admit I'm not familiar with that term.
It's Haitian Creole, rough translation, bear wood. Basically, it's this vigilante movement. People were so fed up, so desperate, that they started taking the law into their own hands.
Vigilante groups, huh? So we're talking about citizens fighting back against the gangs.
Yeah, but the methods they were using, it was brutal. We're talking about lynchings, people burned alive, absolutely horrific stuff.
It's disturbing, but in a way, you can almost understand it. The utter despair, the feeling of having no other choice. But this obviously wasn't a sustainable solution. What did the international community do in the face of all this?
Well, the world couldn't exactly ignore what was happening in Haiti. There was a lot of condemnation of the violence, calls for intervention, and eventually, after a lot of back and forth, the UN Security Council authorized a Kenyan-led security force in late 2023. The idea was to help stabilize the country, trying to create some breathing room for a path towards peace.
It sounds like a logistical nightmare, to be honest, deploying a foreign security force into that kind of volatile environment.
It was always going to be complicated, but it got even more complicated because, well, remember Jimmy Cherizier, the G9 leader?
How could we forget? Former cop turned gang leader, the self-proclaimed revolutionary.
Right. Well, Cherizier, he was completely against any foreign intervention. He saw it as just another outside power meddling in Haiti's affairs. And honestly, a lot of Haitians shared that view. There's this deep distrust of foreign interference, and for good reason, Haiti has a long history of being taken advantage of by outside powers.
So Cherizier wasn't just going to sit back and let this Kenyan force waltz in. What did he do?
He basically threw a wrench in the whole thing. Talk about a power move. In February 2024, while Haiti's acting prime minister, Ariel Henry, was actually in Kenya, like hammering out the final details of the deployment, Cherizier and his G9 crew, they launched a series of attacks.
He waited until the prime minister was out of the country and then launched his attack. That's bold.
He was making a statement. They hit the airport, police stations, businesses, basically anything they could to paralyze the capital.
Wow. So what happened? Did Henry cut his trip short and fly back to deal with the crisis?
He couldn't. Cherizier had basically trapped him in Kenya. With the airport under his control, Henry couldn't even get back into the country. And then, as if to prove he was serious, in March, Cherizier's forces stormed the country's two biggest prisons, let thousands of inmates loose.
He was holding the entire country hostage, showing everyone who was really in control. Did Henry manage to regain control?
It was too much. The pressure, the violence, the international community breathing down his neck. Henry announced his resignation in mid-March. They put together this transitional council tasked with, the impossible job of trying to stabilize Haiti and hold new elections.
What about the Kenyan security force? Did they ever actually deploy?
They did, finally. After a bunch more delays, they arrived in June 2024. But they landed in a country that was just shattered, rampant violence, a population that's both exhausted and wary of yet another foreign intervention. It's a lot.
It sounds like Haiti's at a crossroads.
It's more like a dozen crossroads at once.
That's fair. So where does Haiti go from here? Is there any hope?
If you ask 10 experts, you'll get 20 different answers. Can this Kenyan-led force actually make a difference? Will they be seen as liberators or just another occupying force? And what about the root causes of all this? The poverty, the corruption, the political instability, those are issues that take generations to address.
It's almost overwhelming to think about.
It is. But it's important not to turn away. The people of Haiti deserve our attention, our support, our continued efforts to understand and address this crisis.
It's a stark reminder that the world is full of these complex situations, and there are no easy answers. Well, that's about all the time we have for this deep dive on the crisis in Haiti. It's a heavy topic, and I think we all need a moment to process. But before we go, we want to thank you for joining us as we try to unpack these critical global issues.